Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg, it's the last week that we're talking preseason stuff around the league because we'll have Labor Day weekend with college football, and the NFL is back just like that.
Hey, I'm pretty excited. College football starts this weekend. I guess there's not like major big games, but you know what, Buck? It's college football.
What do you mean? You're not going with me to Vandy, Hawaii down the street here in a couple of days? You don't
know
want
what?
to go?
That's actually a game I'm probably going to watch. That's a night game, is it not?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to probably watch that game. You know, Vanderbilt, before we get into the Titans, I'm curious to see that quarterback because I saw some of him last year, and he's actually a talented kid. So, again, Vandy being in the SEC, no one's expecting them, to be 11-2 or anything like that. But it seems to me, and you never know till the games are played, that they're moving in the right direction.
No, I'd put more respect on Vandy's name under Clark Lee. They upset Kentucky. They upset Florida last year. I know those are, neither of those teams had overwhelmingly successful 2022 seasons, but still good work by the Commodores. And yeah, it's going to be fun to have college football back in our lives. The Vols are playing in Nashville on Labor Day weekend. I'm going to skirt on over and see Joe Milton in that game for their season opener.
Who do they play Labor Day weekend?
They open up with Virginia.
Oh, I'm sure that's a TV game for sure.
Yes, that's an 11 o'clock SEC network game. So looking forward to having football in general, just back in real football.
Got to get through, one more week of the preseason, and then we'll get to the NFL regular season, and we'll be good to go.
Indeed. So Malik Willis getting through a full 4 quarters of a preseason start. Will Levis dealing with injury last week in joint work against Minnesota. Greg, the running game was obviously the highlight of that outing for the Titans, and they were able to find a preseason win. But I wonder what you made of Malik Willis having the opportunity to work through a variety of situations with that full start.
And in some ways, Buck, it's a perfect example of why the preseason is the preseason and why it's hard to overreact. Obviously the week before, and I spoke about it, all I do, as you know, is react to what the tape shows. I don't make a judgment as to what a guy's career is going to be, particularly a young player. Obviously the week before, Malik Willis clearly looked much more comfortable as a player, just in everything he did. This week, he did not. Now, again, this is not going to be a judgment about what Malik Willis is going to be, next week, the week after, or 5 years down the road. But this particular week, he did not look comfortable. He did not see things clearly. He turned down a number of throws that were there. Those were the throws to make based on the route concept versus the coverage, and he turned those throws down. He did not throw the ball when he had to make those throws. And then there were also some inaccurate throws. I'm sure Titans fans all remember that shot play on the third possession, play action boot. It was a post deep over combination, and he had Westbrook-Ikhine wide open on the over route. He had unnecessary movement, which made him hurry himself and be late, and he ended up throwing the ball at Westbrook-Ikhine's feet. Those are throws you cannot miss. You don't get those kinds of opportunities that often for a big play. So, this was just a game where you could tell he just, for whatever reason, he did not see things clearly. I could tell by looking at his head that he just was not looking in the right place a lot. Again, as I always say, I never know the reason. He'd have to tell you, and he's not going to, nor is the coach, nor should they. But he was not a comfortable player in this particular game.
Yeah, and we talked about that last week, Greg, where we saw signs of improvement from last year's sample size of Malik Willis, and you articulated well for the audience the idea of him slowing down as he worked through this, of his frenetic motion slowing down as he showed a little more comfort level within the offense and what he was being asked to do, even in a preseason game. That certainly felt like, just being in Minnesota and watching that from my vantage point in the press box, you could see some of those mechanical breakdowns. I saw him dip out of the back of the pocket again. I haven't seen him do that in a while. When the play broke down, there was some, like you said, a lot of unnecessary motion for him in this game, just generally from a snap in, snap out basis, and an overwhelmingly inconsistent performance from what I saw.
We're really fortunate, or I'm really fortunate here at NFL Films that I get to see the all 22 from the sideline, and then I get to see now both end zones, each end zone from each side.
Yeah.
So it's really, you can see his head, you can't quite see his eyes, but you can see his head. And there were just too many snaps in which he clearly did not register what he was looking at. And there were dropbacks, as I mentioned, where I personally believe that he did not look where he should have based on the route combination versus the coverage, which against the Bears the week prior, he did a much better job of. And obviously the interception. And the interception is a classic case because it was a shot play concept behind 7-man pass protection. It was what we call dagger. Okay, so dagger has an inside vertical and an outside dig. It's a staple route. It's a foundation of what they run. It's in every team's playbook in the NFL. So McMath was running the dig, okay? And Willis was clearly throwing the dig out of the huddle. He snapped his head around. All he did was look right at McMath. He had no idea where that underneath linebacker was. No idea. And the linebacker obviously was right there. So he had no sense of where the dropping linebacker was. So those are the kinds of plays that just, I watch it and I go, I think he needs to know that right now. But again, I'm not making a judgment about, his whole career, saying he's bad, but that's just something where, and I think the coaching staff would agree that that's something he should have been aware of.
Well, and I wanna just quickly see if I can get the quote from Vrabel about his decision making, because that stood out to me, Greg, specifically about when we talked to Mike on Sunday after he'd had the opportunity to go back and review with a little more detail what he saw in the preseason game, and Vrabel basically spoke to his dissatisfaction with the decision making, not just in the interception moment, but at a couple of different moments.
Overall, he left a lot of throws on the field, and he turned down throws that are there that you have to throw.
Right. And that's been the biggest coaching point for him consistently is that, and specifically trying to hone in his decision-making and isolating and eliminating processes, as we've talked about many times on this podcast, and still a work in progress for Malik. So we'll see what happens on Friday. The Patriots were supposed to be here for joint camp practices this week, obviously with the Bolden situation. They felt it better to send them back to New England for the week after spending a week in Green Bay. They'll still play the game, obviously, here on Friday. Bill Belichick not going to be throwing the house at Malik Willis and Will Levis if Levis is to play, but I would imagine that there would be some opportunities for their decision-making to be tested.
You would think. I mean, first of all, I don't know what, no one knows what Bill Belichick's going to do in a game, in the last preseason game. They are a good defense, and they're going to have a really good defense, in my view, this year. But who knows what's going to happen Friday night? It's Friday night?
Friday night, yes.
Right. I mean, who knows? I can't speak to that. Willis, and depending on who is the number 2 and who's the number 3, Willis continues to need more snaps, as of course does Levis. Levis is a rookie. Levis had ups and downs versus the Bears the week prior. He did some good things. He did some things that weren't so good. He's in a similar situation. He's a little different player than Willis in the sense that he's predominantly been a pocket quarterback his whole life, whereas Willis has been much more of a movement quarterback because he's a phenomenal athlete. And I know Mike Vrabel also said you don't want to take that away from him, and you don't. But that's one of the most difficult balances to find, Buck, with quarterbacks that have great athletic ability. We talk about that with Justin Fields a lot too. Sometimes you just have to let guys play to figure out what the balance is. Now, Fields, he's going to be the starter, so he's going to play and ideally figure that out. Willis is not going to be the starter. Even if he's named number 2, he's not going to be the starter. Guys like that need to play to figure out what the balance is, to get a feel for the game and what pressure really is and isn't. See, that's the key point. Guys who are great runners and know that they can make plays with their legs, they often leave the pocket prematurely. So, because by NFL standards, it's not pressure, but they know they have great legs and can make plays. So they end up leaving the pocket prematurely and turning down throws or not seeing throws that they should see. You just have to play through that. But, Willis may not get the opportunity to. He's not going to be the starting quarterback.
Yeah, there's only so many snaps to go around, and certainly Ryan Tannehill is going to be the starter here. He's the best quarterback option on the roster by
And
by
he's a
considerable
quality
margin.
NFL quarterback. I don't know what people in Nashville say about him, but the guy's had a good career, and he's a quality NFL starting quarterback.
I think there is it may be a little more begrudging after the Bengals playoff game in 2021 with the 3 interceptions, but for the most part, he is appreciated here for what he's been able to do and the quality of quarterback play that he brings. In the meantime, Greg, I do want to talk about Tajay Spears. We spent a little time with him last week. The running game, it took a little while for them to get going, particularly the starting offensive line playing more series in this game than they had the week previous. But Spears continues to make plays. The ground game on the whole was the highlight of the evening, but I wonder what you saw from the rookie running back.
Yeah, and again, obviously the highlight for him was the 33-yard touchdown. And what you want to see from a back is his ability to make filling unblocked defenders miss, okay? And he made the unblocked filling safety Lewis Cine, who many remember from Georgia in the SEC, a really fine player at Georgia. Didn't play last year due to injury, but Minnesota would like him to be a starter given where they drafted him. But he made him miss. And it didn't seem like it took a lot of effort to make him miss. And you really want to see that because he's an unblockable player because he's coming from the back end. So, you really like that about Spears. And the other thing you really like about Spears was because he had to make a player miss, but then his ability to get to top speed in a very few steps. You really love to see that. The other thing I'd like to see about that play, mention about that play, and I don't know if you talk to the O-line coach, Mike Sullivan, or Vrabel speaks to this. There was an outstanding block by Brewer on the zero technique on that play, an outstanding block. And I actually think, and again, I'm not charting every play, so that's why I asked you if you've spoken to anybody because you're there. I think Brewer has done okay in the run game as this, obviously he's gotten not got a ton of snaps, but I think he's done well as a run blocker. And I to me, I would be pretty optimistic about that.
No, I think on the whole, that's been one of the biggest positives for them in not just in the preseason, but in camp in general. And I actually talked to Brewer. We won't talk to Jason Hoteling this week, the offensive line coach, Mike Sullivan, the assistant offensive line
coach.
Okay. For the audience. But Brewer kind of deferred. Well, it takes all 5 of us. We're getting chemistry together and things like that. But his technique in the run game, Greg, is the thing that stands out to me. And it's the thing that I think mitigates his size deficiencies the most. And I think that's been coming through on tape.
And that's a great point, Buck. And even though it was not the starting nose for the Vikings, it's the size thing because, everybody ought, I spoke to someone who covers the league and has for years who immediately said, oh, the center's 280 pounds. That's a real problem. That's going to be the general consensus if you're not studying the tape and familiar with the team. But even last year, 2-3 weeks ago when I watched a ton of Derrick Henry, as I told you, and Brewer was playing left guard, I actually thought he was good in the run game as well.
Yeah.
So he has a feel for angles, for leverage. Yeah, will there be plays he gets overpowered? I'm sure there will be. It's going to happen. But for the most part, I think he's been really solid in the run game. And again, like I said, like the 2 O-line coaches, I'm not charting every play. They're doing that in detail. That's their job. I'm not. But I think for the most part, he's done very well.
No, I would agree with that assessment. Having watched these games a couple of times through and talking to the coaching staff, they seem pretty pleased with where both he and Skoronski are at. Brunskill is still, not necessarily where they need him to be at this stage on the opposite side as the right guard, but those two together, Skoronski and Brewer, have I think acquitted themselves well.
To be honest with you, I think Dillard has been solid as well. I mean, I don't think he's been a problem. I think he still needs to work on his hands and pass pro, which is coachable. But I think in the run game, again, to me, he's never going to be a mauler and just lay people out. He's not going to be that guy. But you don't have to be. You don't see that very often in the NFL anyway. But I think for the most part, he's understood leverage reasonably well. He's understood when there have been combo blocks, when to leave the combo and go to the next guy. I mean, again, for the most part, I think he's understood how to do it. Now, again, people are going to say they're playing against backups. Yes, true. But you still want to see the execution done the right way.
And they just need him to be solid. Like they need him to not be an issue. They need to not have to move Skoronski out to left tackle if, break glass in case of emergency type situation. They just need to get by with this current iteration of the offensive line.
And as part of that, the thing they truly need is for him to be able to block one-on-one in pass protection.
So, Greg, do you know Jeff Stoutland at all?
I do.
So the Eagles offensive line coach, for the audience who may not be familiar, they obviously have had great success finding and developing talent in Philadelphia, and Dillard not able to crack the starting lineup there and had injury that was also involved in that as well. I didn't know if you had spoken to the Eagles staff or had spoken to anybody about Dillard at any point along the way to kind of see what the assessment was of him heading into this next stop.
They didn't dislike him. It's not like, oh my God, it's just that Mailata is a freak.
Yeah.
And the issue was Dillard can't play right tackle.
Yes.
Because he was tried there and he couldn't do it. And that's the case with some guys. I mean, they can only play one side because everything is different. The hand usage is different. The kick slide and the footwork is totally different. And he just couldn't play right tackle. So Mailata is a freak. He's 6'7", 6'8". He's 300, whatever pounds he is. I mean, everybody saw those clips of him when he came out playing, I guess it was Australian rules football, if memory serves me correctly. Mm-hmm. The guy's just a freakish athlete. So, he had to play, and they've developed him. So Dillard became a backup, and then he became a free agent, but they didn't think he couldn't play. Obviously the concern always was, in some people's minds, the mental. And by the mental, I don't mean that he's not smart, because you've probably talked to him a little bit. He's actually a very sharp kid.
Yes.
But just and I hate to say this because it comes across wrong, but just the toughness, snap after snap after snap, the competitiveness, and because he's a really nice kid,
There has been a part of that in the discussion here as well, and people call it that dog in him, or all these kind of generalities and things like that.
He's not Richie Incognito.
Correct.
Right.
He's not Jamarco Jones, who got cut here for slapping his teammates after the play, stuff like that. But a passable left tackle so far in the early going,
and his talent is such that he can be more than that, but. Because he's got, again, you get caught up, everybody does who does draft work like I do, you get caught up in the traits, and he's got, quote unquote, left tackle feet. Now, that doesn't automatically mean you're a great left tackle, but he has left tackle feet. He's very light on his feet.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. New Orleans is a difficult opponent to open with.
We'll get into that, because New Orleans defensively presents a lot of schematic and tactical concerns. Dennis Allen, even though he's technically not the D coordinator, but it's his defense. And we'll go into detail, as we get closer, but that's a difficult defense to play against.
Schematic and tactical concerns. It must be football season. We're getting closer.
There we go.
That's exciting stuff.
And that's what I get excited about,
Absolutely. I do want to, and I don't know how much of him you watch, Greg, but T.R. Tart did play a fair amount of snaps in this game against the Vikings offensive line. Again, people are going to bring up the idea of playing against backups and second teamers and things like that. But Tart, as a disruptor in the middle of that defense, along with Jeff Simmons, Autry, Landry, and Key, once they finally get out there as a collective group, Tart has been consistently getting better over the course of his career here.
I would agree.
And I think we're starting to see that on a more consistent level, which is about as good a news as you could have if you're a Titans fan, keeping tabs on this defense.
And he's a Philly guy.
He is a Philly guy. A Philly basketball player. That's
right. He's a Philly guy. Ever since Tart started playing, and, again, no one knew him. He was a free agent. I think he's performed well from day one there. And I guess the biggest question is how they're going to divvy up snaps. Tart's not going to play in the sub defenses. We know that. So the question is, how do they divvy up snaps in the base? And, he may be in a situation where they say, we got to get this guy snaps. He's a good player, and I don't think anybody knows that now. They probably don't know that, because obviously, with Key there, with Autry there, with, Simmons is not going to lose snaps. Maybe Autry's getting older and they feel like, hey, let's not give him as many snaps so that when we do play him and, he's really fresh. I don't know. They'll figure that out. But I think Tart is he's a good athlete. He's quick. That's the thing. He's and that's probably the basketball background, but he's quicker than you would think looking at his body type.
He credits a background in basketball very much for his footwork in particular. And I think that quickness for a man that size. A lot of offensive linemen, DeJuan Jones, famously a basketball player prior to his time at Ohio State, and more common than I think people might realize, but it's really evident in a player like Tart, who had a different route to go through the world of college football prior to having been recruited at Alabama, but the talent is clearly and obviously there. It's paying dividends for them.
Yeah, and you know what? The Eagles are like this, and they're very good. Some teams are like this as well. I mean, Tennessee is, but you never really have enough talent on the defensive line and enough bodies, because in this league now, what happens? It's a lot of pass rush. It's a lot of no huddle tempo, and defensive linemen can't play 75 snaps a game. It's just too many snaps. So to have quality defensive linemen, as I said, we don't know what the division of labor will be in the rotation, but he's going to play snaps, and he's not going to play 2 or 3. He's going to play more. We just don't know.
Yeah, it's something that Mike Vrabel has emphasized with him for a considerable amount of time. In particular, they've made him a healthy scratch before because they didn't feel like his conditioning was right. So I think at this point they have a pretty motivated version of him, and being in a contract year for Teair Tart doesn't quite hurt as well. Before we wrap up, Greg, I do want to just briefly get your perspective on Trey Lance, who it looks like is going to be the odd man out in San Francisco. Brock Purdy named has been the starter. Sam Darnold named the backup, and now it looks like San Francisco is going to try and recoup some value for Trey Lance, if at all possible. He's played a fair amount in the preseason, and I wonder what you've made of him for a player who just has so little tape to evaluate.
Yeah, I would say he's been very up and down, which I would be expecting that. That's the thing. I think because he hasn't played a lot of football, and I did watch him the year in 2019 when he was a really good player in college. But one legitimate question that I would have watching his tape, and again, I don't know this for a fact, I'm just trying to extrapolate from tape study, that's all I do, is whether he has a natural sense of timing and anticipation. He's another guy that doesn't turn it loose at times. He turns down throws that are there. Sometimes I feel like he doesn't recognize or process what he should, and just doesn't see it the right way. He was much more decisive at times in this game where I said, okay, that's good. So there's ups and downs. At the end of the day, I can totally understand why Kyle Shanahan and staff made this decision, because if Purdy were to get hurt or not be ready, obviously the 5 throws Purdy had, and there were bubble screens, they were not hard throws. If he were not to be able to play, they'd clearly feel more comfortable putting Sam Darnold out there than Trey Lance. I totally understand that at this point. The problem is the same with Lance as it is for Willis. He needs to play, and he's just not going to get that opportunity. So if he does, for whatever reason, get an opportunity, some of the same concerns will show up just because he needs to work through them playing the position, but he's not going to get the opportunity.
The league moves quickly. That's something, especially quicker and quicker every year, it feels like, at the quarterback position. And Trey Lance, Malik Willis, kind of examples of that, certainly. Greg, always a pleasure to break down the tape with you. Looking forward to getting into some college football probably by the time we reconvene next week ahead of the NFL season and a trip down to New Orleans for the Titans. Thanks for the time, my friend.
All right, just don't ask me about the right guard on Hawaii or anything like that, okay?
I will make it no right guard from Hawaii discussion on next week's NFL podcast. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Buck.